Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. So this video is going to be, I'm going to try to make it brief for your sakes. It's not going to discuss this book, Monsters, but a number of booktubers have talked about it. That's a nice picture of Picasso on the cover. I don't know if the implication that Picasso was a monster is intentional or not, but the subject of the book is artists who do reprehensible things, and how do we react to their work? Do we still buy their book if they're an author? Do we still go and see their movie if they're a filmmaker? I feel that the line in the sand that you have to draw is something you have to draw for yourself, and I'm not particularly concerned with how other people have drawn that line for themselves. Now, that being said, I will be inconsistent in everything that I have to say. That is, I suppose, every human being's privilege. My principle is that the art is entirely separate from the artist, and your knowledge about the artist should not influence your reading of or experiencing of the work of art in any way whatsoever. Of course, that hard and fast line between the two is impossible to draw. In the case of, say, John Keats, you know how his demise was met, and that colors the reading that you give to his last poems. Similarly with Wilfred Owen, you know that he was killed in the war, and that cannot but color your reading of his war poems. So I say that, but then in practice, it's not quite so clear. So, for example, Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholder, I read his book a little bit. I had the modern library edition of a lot of stuff, and I read some of it. I read many of his letters, and I read his what was it, the Constitution for the state of Virginia, I think. And I don't think I would go back to him now. Because of his being a slaveholder. But where the inconsistency comes in, that will not stop me from reading Cicero, who also was a slaveholder and was very concerned about slaves when they escaped his grasp. So that's the inconsistency that I will allow myself. But as far as what sort of reprehensible deeds you are going to penalize an author for, or if you are, or how you are going to penalize them, that is a matter that lies within each of us individually. So, for example, were I to be in a position to see the marvelous salt cellar done by Benuto Cellini, I would admire the beauty of it, I am sure, and just try to put out of my mind the fact that he was something of a disreputable individual. But in many cases, particularly reading, it's a tougher call. Reading you have to invest time in. And so I don't know. I liked Albert Camus' novel, The Plague, so much that I read it twice when I was young. But I don't know if I can ever go back to Camus, because while I was doing research on a related topic, I found out that he was a advocate of torture. I was actually reading things about the torture campaign in Algeria and came across a letter which Camus had written in which he said, one can be idealistic about it, he said, but when I understand that it might be my mother who is victim of the terrorist activities of these evil perpetrators, then I let that all go out the window and I say, torture that out of them. I'm exaggerating what Camus wrote in his letter, or Camus, but since I have not been in a position where my mother might possibly be the victim of some terrorist attack, I do not use that excuse to justify my advocating in favor of torture. Another case came up recently when I was watching a certain literate Texan, by which I mean Randy Ray, and I'll link his channel below, but this has nothing to do with his post. His video was talking about books that were published during the course of his life, and particularly those which he had read. And one of those books happened to be a book that I had read, and it got me to thinking about this subject. And that was Solar Pons. You may not know Solar Pons. Solar Pons was a pastiche of Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a limited number of stories featuring Sherlock Holmes. I mean, the collected book is about like this, and there's 4 novels included with that. When I was young, I read them and wanted more. There was a slim volume, I believe, written by Conan Doyle's son, if not son, grandson, with a co-author, I think. And I read those but wasn't so smitten. But I did discover Solar Pons, the pastiche of Sherlock Holmes, written by August Derleth. Some publishing house had been putting them out in little mass market paperbacks, and I had a number of them. I wish I had them yet so that I could refer to them and even hold one up for you to see. And I liked them very much. I liked them better than any of the Sherlock Holmes stories written by other hands, including the 7% Solution, which was big at that time. So I liked Solar Pons very much. And it was years later that I found out that August Derleth had a shady side to his character. And that was, I believe I actually heard the story from the mouth of my teacher, Paul Carroll. So this is collected or selected poems by Paul Carroll, and this is what my teacher looked like. And Paul Carroll was a poet of the Beat generation, and he was a fairly important figure in getting the Beats' work out into the public eye. He published a literary magazine called Big Table. I believe it went on for 4 issues, and it was put out of business because August Derleth lodged a complaint. I believe in those days some sort of censorship complaint would be lodged with the post office. I am not sure, but it put the magazine out of business. Now, Paul had published many of the important beat writers that we think of today. It was to Paul's regret that he never made it into that upper echelon, I suppose. But I have never forgiven August Derleth for his actions in doing that, and generally speaking, the ideals, this guy again, of censorship run counter to my way of thinking. So I will never pick up solar ponds again. I mean, if I saw one at the cheapy bin at the charity or something, I would grab it and I would probably get it and just flip through it. But I will never read him genuinely in the future. And to my mind, what August Derleth did is reprehensible, and I might also give Albert Camus a pass, realizing that what he jotted in one solitary letter to a personal correspondent may not be as implicating as an action such as August Derleth's. So I thought those thoughts have been in my head, and I thought I would just post briefly about them with little else to say on the topic. Thank you very much for stopping by.